President Maduro just took a historic trip to Iran this June. He also took a trip to Algeria and to Turkey, which is interesting, a NATO member, although Turkey constantly plays the West against China and Russia. Turkey's playing everyone against everyone at all times. But in Algeria, Maduro announced that they were working together to support Palestinians and support the people of the Western Sahara. And then he also took an historic trip to Tehran and signed a 20-year cooperation agreement between Venezuela and Iran. And Maduro announced that this will involve Iranian technological support for the Venezuelan oil sector and other Venezuelan technology. It includes technology transfers. It also includes medical support, and it includes economic agreements. So I'm wondering if you can talk about what this 20-year agreement between Iran and Venezuela could mean. This comes after Iran has sent many oil tankers to Venezuela full of lighter crude and oil diluents, which is what Venezuela needs in order to process the very heavy crude that Venezuela has. Because you can't just take the crude out of the ground and use it. You have to process it. And the U.S. blockade has made it very hard for Venezuela to get lighter crude and diluents. And furthermore, we know that Iran has even opened supermarkets in Venezuela. I think it's called Megasis. So maybe you can talk about the growing economic partnership between Venezuela and Iran and what you think about this 20-year historic agreement.
Yes, what you're saying is true. I mean, the relationship between Iran and Venezuela has been strengthening a lot in recent years, especially during these sanction times from 2017 until today. And one of the areas where the Iranians has been very most active, if you ask me, in my opinion, is the oil industry, and they has been key to us, especially since 2019 when we started to suffer gas scarcity all over the country. 2020 actually, when the pandemic began, and and um, the Iranians were the ones that sends oil tankers full of gasoline at the beginning, because we didn't have enough gasoline. Maduro said recently during the trip to Iran that the oil refineries, gasoline refineries in Venezuela were shut down, were not working, and that created a big problem. I mean, not having gas in a country is or diesel is terrible, not only for the people but for the economy. So the Iranians were the first that start sending oil tankers to Venezuela with gasoline, disregarding the fact that the U.S. was threatening on attacking those tankers, and actually at some point they seized like two or three of these tankers. But most of the tankers with gasoline finally arrived to Venezuela, and the U.S. Has not seized more tankers lately. But with that help, also the Iranian people, the Iranian government sent specialists, technical teams to evaluate the status of our refining facilities. And I have to say that those refineries were U.S. made. All the parts, all the technology, everything was built by the U.S. because we were a colony of the U.S. before Chavez came to power, like most of the countries in the region, and like most oil producing countries. So when the US start applying sanctions to Venezuela, uh, uh, of course the refineries were resent because we were not receiving enough. We were not receiving the parts needed to repair, to improve, to maintain all the refining facilities. So the Iranians came here and they are still working, trying to change the platform, the technological infrastructure for Venezuelan petrochemical, facilities, and and that's gonna be no, that's gonna be that is very important because we might get rid of that dependency from Iranian oil. Another thing that Maduro said when he was in Iran, and it has not received too much media attention, but we published it in Orinoco Tribune a few days ago, is that Maduro announced that General Soleimani, the Soleimani that was killed by the US in a drone attack in Iraq like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, uh, immediately after the electrical blackout that we suffered in 2019, that was a heavy national blackout that affected Venezuela for several days, and that the government said that it was sabotage. Maduro, during his trip to Iran, says that General Soleimani and a group of Iranians came 2 or 3 days later after the blackout to help Venezuela with the blackout. And that he stayed in Venezuela for like 1 or 2 days, and immediately after he went back to Iran, he sent a group of experts to help Venezuela deal with the electrical crisis. I mean, those are the things that happens, and you only know a few years later when the authorities decide that it's time to release that information. But that's was something important because it talks about the level of relationships and brotherhood between Venezuela and Iran. And one have to say, and I'm putting it right now as Iranian helping us, but also at some point in 2009, President Chavez sent a lot of oil to Iran because they were suffering gasoline, I believe, to Iran because they were suffering some problems with gasoline production in Iran. And we know in Venezuela that Iranians also appreciate and value that help that Venezuela provided then to Iran. So we have a very nice and strong relationship that, of course, is being bombarded everywhere by mainstream media, by Zionist groups, by U.S. intelligence, by right wingers all over the world. And recently, we have this case of an airplane, 747, that is grounded in Argentina because they say that it was an Iranian plane and that a big crew of Iranians were in the a big group of Iranians were part of the crew, and that's part of the psychological smearing campaign that they always launch whenever the levels of relations between Iran and Venezuela is growing. So they initiate these campaigns against Venezuela and Iran, and that's something that is still happening. That situation with that cargo airplane from Venezuela company Emtrasur, which is a subsidiary of Conviasa. And that created a lot of headlines in the region, and it still is creating a lot of headlines in the region because some judges in Argentina went into the issue, and they seized not only the plane but also the crew, and they took their passports. So I don't know. I haven't read lately what is the latest status of the incident, but it's something happening right now. So it says a lot about the relationship between Iran and Venezuela, and President Maduro and I forgot the name of the current president of Iran, but the
Raisi,
president,
Ebrahim
uh-huh,
Raisi.
Raisi, signed this strategic 20 years strategic alliance, which I believe is something that comes very naturally. I mean, is something that is absolutely happening because of we have a very strong levels of relations right now with Iran, and we are aiming at strengthening that relation because it's good for Venezuela to have that relation. And also during the visit of President Maduro to Iran, the Iranians delivered a tanker, an oil tanker, part of a deal that was signed several years ago with Venezuela, when Venezuela bought 4 tankers from Iran. The first one was delivered like 2 or 3 years ago, and this is the second one. And we are talking about massive oil tankers being built in Iran, and that shows also the might of the Iranian economy. That besides, in despite of being also sanctioned as crazy for several decades already, they has been able to have this strong economy capable of building that kind of ships. So I believe that the level of relationship is getting stronger. Tourism was another issue that was discussed during Maduro's trip, and we are gonna open. Sorry, we're gonna open this. Um, Actually, the first flight of Conviasa between Tehran and Caracas was scheduled for this Saturday. So I believe that it already happened, but we are, the level of, I mean, Venezuela opened with Conviasa this weekly flight from Caracas to Tehran, and that's also part of the attacks that you now see that I was mentioning with this 747 plane being grounded in Iran, because that is the campaign that they usually launch, because they say that in these planes are gonna come terrorists from Iran, and they create this CIA, Mossad stories with a lot of uh, uh, movie Hollywood kind of information that you immediately realize that is bullshit. But anyway, they keep saying that, and they keep promoting those stories here and there, trying to smear Venezuela and Iran. But that's not going to happen. The relationship of Venezuela and Iran is getting stronger. Tourism is one of those elements that are part of the discussions. But I'm sure that security and defense is another one. But governments do usually do not talk too much about those things for obvious reasons. But that's also part of the relationship with Venezuela and Iran. And going back to tourism, a group of Iranian tour operators were coming to Venezuela. I mean, local news in Venezuela announced that a few days ago. So a group of tour operators from Iran are coming to Venezuela to evaluate the possibilities of promoting tourist packages between the two countries. And Venezuela is looking for that. Venezuela is in desperate need of income, uh, and besides a possible resumption of oil operations, um, Venezuela needs to diversify its economy that was stuck in oil for several decades, not because we wanted that, but because the US uh, wanted us to be like that. And that's something that a lot of people blame the governments of different countries because of the economic model that they have, but no one talks about how the US shaped the economic world order after Second World War in order to have the economic world order that they wanted. And that's what we are seeing right now. And that's something that we are right now seeing that is cracking and that is falling apart. And I wish that that moment when the US is not the hegemon that control everything in the world comes to life. And I believe that's also part of your dream, and that's why you call your website Multipolarista, right, man?
That's exactly right. And this is the perfect segue, Jesus. I know it's already been an hour. I know you have to go, so you don't have a lot of time. So I have one final question, and you perfectly segued it. I wanted to talk about Venezuela's role in this emerging multipolar world. Venezuela's relationship with Iran is, I think, very much part of it. And, I wrote an article at Multipolarista multipolarista.com, about the 20-year cooperation plan signed between Venezuela and Iran. You can see President Maduro here with President Raisi of Iran. But I also mentioned in this article another article that I had written about Nicaragua signing a series of historic agreements with Iran. You know, Nicaragua, it's a much smaller country, only 6.5 million people, so this didn't get as much coverage as Venezuela's agreement. But it shows that there is this growing partnership between these countries in the global south. Iran and China in 2021 signed a 25-year cooperation plan estimated at $400 billion. $400 billion. So we're seeing the emergence of this axis of resistance, right? Not only in West Asia with the Lebanese resistance and Palestine and Syria and Iraq and Iran, but also that is kind of merging with the Latin American axis of resistance of Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Bolivia. They're partnering with China and Russia. They're part of this group at the UN called Group of Friends in Defense of the UN Charter. We saw in 2019, Venezuela hosted the non-aligned movement, Movimiento de los Países No Alineados, that was held in Caracas in 2019 at the peak of the US coup attempt. So Venezuela, in addition to being a leader of the left, it has become this kind of new voice of a global South cooperation movement, advocating regional integration in Latin America, but also South-South integration and South-South cooperation. So I'm wondering if we can just conclude with what your thoughts are about Venezuela's role in trying to build this new multipolar world. When Maduro gave a speech for the People's Summit of the People's Summit for Democracy in protest of the U.S. government-controlled summit, which was a complete disaster that the presidents of 8 countries in the region did not attend. In that speech that Maduro gave to the People's Summit for Democracy, he said that we are building a new multipolar world. So I'm wondering what you think about Venezuela's role in this process of not only resisting imperialism, that's one thing, but also trying to build a new political and economic architecture against imperialism.
That's true. That's true. Venezuela has been since Chavez time trying to build this multipolar new world order, and I believe that we have been successful doing that because. Especially because of Chavez. Chavez was very insistent on this multipolar world. And Maduro, as his minister for foreign affairs for several years, and now as president is just replicating what the teachings of Chavez, and he believes in that, of course, and you can see that everywhere, but especially in these times, current times, with all the economic disaster that has been clearly seen during pandemic times in the West, in the US and Europe, with all this disruption in production chains all over the world, that they right now are blaming on China because China closed Shanghai for 2 or 3 weeks. But everyone knows that that's not the cause of the problem, because the problem happened a lot of months before that, and we now see the craziness inflation in the U.S. and the effect that has in the U.S. In the interest rates that has been raised by the Federal Reserve in the U.S., affecting world markets. Markets everywhere. That's a sign that something bad is happening in the economic system designed and created and run by the U.S. After the Second World War, and that system is cracking, is falling apart for several years already, but we now are witnessing the whole thing happening in front of our eyes, and and I believe that what you are talking about Venezuela strengthening relations with Iran, but also Iran signing strategic alliances with China, but also China having strategic alliances with Russia. And a few days ago, there was this phone call between Xi Jinping and President Putin, where Xi Jinping reiterated his commitment with Russia. I mean, those are things that happen and sometimes are not covered by mainstream media because they don't reflect their imperialist narrative. But those things are happening, and countries are noticing that the US economy is about to crack and that they need to detach from the dollar war system that was created by the Bretton Woods institution in 47 and 48. I mean, those things are happening and we are witnessing, and I'm happy and honored that Venezuela is one of those countries that has been promoting the the emergence of this new approach towards international relations with a multipolar approach, and just to mention something that happened just a few days ago. I mean, last this weekend in St. Petersburg, Russia, there was this international economic forum, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, where Venezuela had a lot of economic experts that met with Russian experts and Chinese experts to talk about ways to facilitate payments between our countries without the using of dollar. Venezuela announced during those meetings in St. Petersburg that the mere payment system that is used in Russia, especially after the Mastercard and Visa went out of the Russian market because of U.S. sanctions, is going to be used in Venezuela. I mean, Russians that comes to Venezuela for tourist reasons are going to be able to use their Mir cards in order to pay for anything that they want to pay here in Venezuela, and they won't have to need to have like to use their cash. And those are the things that are happening right now. We have a lot of technology that can be used to in this sense to try to build alternative of that to the dollar, and that's going to be very important. I mean, I believe that the countries that detach from the dollar faster are the countries that are going to survive the imminent economic crisis that is going to come after the whole dollar economic model collapse. So I'm happy because Venezuela is, doing something to promote and to encourage this new world order, and that is part of the Chavista legacy, and I'm happy because of that.
Yeah, very well said. And I have to say that Hugo Chavez was so prescient when it came to this. This is an
Yes.
article, Chavez, the great integrationist and promoter of a multipolar world. It points out that in 1998, a year before he became president, winning a free and fair democratic election, although the fact that he won elections is ignored by the Western media, which calls him a so-called dictator. But Chavez said in 1998, quote, "The world of the 21st century that is already on the horizon, it will not be bipolar or unipolar. Thank God it will be multipolar." He said that in 1998. Just imagine the prescience of being able to
Yes.
see more than 20 years before. I mean, because it's only now that we're finally seeing the emergence of this multipolar world that Chavez helped give birth to. And I think that, yeah, you're right that, Venezuela, it plays such a key role in that historic process. And that's why, despite the difficulties that the Venezuelan people have suffered in the past few years, I think those difficulties will be seen as the birth pangs of a new world order. That's a reference to Condoleezza Rice, the neoconservative war criminal in the U.S. government, who referred to the U.S. imperialist wars in West Asia as the so-called birth pangs of the new Middle East. Well, the U.S. economic war on Venezuela and much of the world is the birth pangs of this new multipolar world. So I want to thank you, Jesus Rodriguez Espinosa, a great Venezuelan journalist, for joining us. I would highly recommend that everyone check out his website. It's called the Orinoco Tribune. He is the editor. He's very prolific. You can find that at orinocotribune.com.